In the sleepy village of Lymstock, 1943, a sinister secret festers beneath the charm of ivy-clad cottages. When vicious anonymous letters flood the town, accusing neighbours of shameful acts, pilot Jerry Burton and his spirited sister Joanna uncover a chilling truth. A woman's suicide is no accident. It's murder, masterminded by a cunning killer hiding in plain sight. With the help of the unassuming yet razor-sharp Miss Marple, they unravel a web of greed, betrayal, and deadly deceit. As a second murder strikes, the race is on to catch a poison pen whose ink runs red, before Lymstock's heart stops forever. Chapter 1: The Quiet of Lymstock. The train from London to Lymstock rattled through the April countryside, its rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the ache in Jerry Burton's leg. A year ago, he'd been a pilot, banking his Spitfire through the skies. Now, at 35, he was earthbound, his body patched together after a crash that had left him with a limp and a doctor's stern advice. Rest. Quiet, no excitement. Lymstock, a speck on the map in the West Country, promised all three. Beside him, Joanna, his younger sister, flipped through a fashion magazine, her blonde curls catching the sunlight. "It'll be deadly dull, Jerry," she warned, her voice bright with mischief. "But I suppose we'll survive." Their new home, Little Firs, was a low, rambling house leased from Miss Emily Barton, a spinster whose family had once owned half the village. Miss Barton, with her faded lace and tremulous smile, had greeted them that morning, her hands fluttering as she pointed out the garden's rosebeds and the drawing-room's chintz curtains. "Lymstock is ever so peaceful," she'd said, her eyes earnest. "You'll find it a balm." Jerry, leaning on his stick, had nodded politely, though he'd caught a flicker of unease in her gaze, as if peace were a fragile thing. The village itself was a postcard of rural England. Cottages with thatched roofs, a church with a Norman tower, and a high street where the butcher, baker, and grocer conducted business with unhurried nods. At the Blue Boar, the local tea shop, Jerry and Joanna stopped for lunch. Mrs. Price, the proprietress, bustled over, her apron crisp, her smile wide but sharp at the edges. "Newcomers, are you? From London, I hear. Well, you'll find Lymstock a change. Quiet like, but we've our ways." Her words carried a weight Jerry couldn't place, and as she poured their tea, she lowered her voice. "Mind you, there's been a bit of bother lately. Nasty letters, anonymous going round. Proper upset folks they have." Joanna's eyebrows shot up. "Letters? What sort?" Mrs. Price glanced about, then leaned closer. "Vile things, miss. Accusing people of all sorts, affairs, thieving, you name it. Poor Mrs. Calthrop, the vicar's wife, got one last week. Turned her white as a sheet." Jerry frowned, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "Who's sending them?" he asked. Mrs. Price shrugged, her lips pursing. "Nobody knows. Some say it's a prank, others reckon it's malice. Either way, it stirred the village up." Back at Little Firs, Jerry mulled over Mrs. Price's words. The house was silent save for the tick of a grandfather clock and the distant clatter of their maid unpacking. Joanna, sprawled on a sofa, was less troubled. "Sounds like village gossip run amok," she said, lighting a cigarette. "Probably some bored spinster with too much time." Jerry wasn't so sure. He limped to the window, gazing at the green beyond, where a woman in a tweed coat hurried past, her head bowed. Something in her haste felt furtive, out of step with Lymstock's drowsy charm. That evening, Dr. Owen Griffith called, a lean man with a tired face and eyes that saw too much. He'd been summoned by Miss Barton to check on Jerry's health, but his visit felt more like a neighbour's courtesy. "You'll find Lymstock restful," he said, echoing Miss Barton, though his tone lacked her warmth. "Though it's not without its quirks." Jerry, sensing an opening, mentioned the letters. Griffith's expression tightened. "Yes, they're a nuisance. I got one myself. Rubbish about my practice. Best ignore them." But his fingers drummed on his knee, betraying unease. As Griffith left, another visitor arrived. Miss Jane Marple, a friend of Miss Barton's, staying briefly in Lymstock. She was a small, elderly woman, her white hair neatly pinned, her blue eyes deceptively mild behind spectacles. Her knitting needles clicked as she settled into a chair, her smile benign yet piercing. "Miss Barton speaks highly of you, Mr. Burton," she said, "and of Lymstock's tranquillity, though I gather there's been some disquiet." Her tone was light, but Jerry felt she already knew more than she let on. He mentioned the letters, expecting a gasp or flutter. Instead, Miss Marple nodded. "Poison pen letters," she said, her needles pausing. "They're a curious thing. Often they're not about the words at all, but what lies beneath them." Joanna, intrigued, pressed her. "You mean they're a distraction?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps. In my experience, malice has a purpose, even if it's buried deep. But I'm sure Lymstock will sort itself out." She resumed knitting, her movements precise, and Jerry felt a prickle of fascination. This unassuming woman, with her wool and her platitudes, seemed to see Lymstock's undercurrents more clearly than anyone. As dusk fell, casting shadows across the room, he wondered what secrets the village held, and whether its quiet was merely a mask. Chapter 2. The First Letter. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of little furs, casting delicate patterns on the breakfast table where Jerry Burton sat, his coffee cooling untouched. 3 days had passed since their arrival to Lymstock, and the village's charm, its cobbled lanes, the church bells' measured toll, had begun to settle his nerves. Joanna, ever restless, was upstairs, her laughter drifting down as she debated outfits with their maid. Jerry, leafing through a week-old newspaper, felt a flicker of contentment, until the postman's knock shattered the quiet. The letter lay on the hall table, a cheap envelope with no stamp, the address scrawled in uneven block capitals. Jerry, curious, slit it open, expecting a neighbour's welcome. Instead, the words leapt out, crude and venomous. "You and that tart you call a sister! Shame on your filthy ways!" The accusation, absurdly false, stung like a slap. Joanna, descending in a swirl of perfume, snatched the paper from his hand. Her eyes scanned it, then she burst into laughter. "What rot! Someone's got a twisted mind. Shall we frame it as a souvenir?" Jerry's jaw tightened. Her flippancy grated, though he knew she meant to lighten the mood. "It's not a joke, Joe," he said, limping to the window. The street was empty, save for a boy on a bicycle, but Jerry felt watched. Mrs. Price's talk of anonymous letters flooded back. Mrs. Calthrop, Mr. Pye, now them. He folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. We should show this to someone. Griffith, perhaps. He mentioned getting one. Dr. Owen Griffith lived in a stone cottage at the edge of the village, its garden overgrown with nettles. When Jerry called that afternoon, Griffith was in his study, surrounded by medical journals and a faint scent of antiseptic. The doctor's lean face, shadowed by fatigue, hardened as Jerry produced the letter. "Same as mine," Griffith said, retrieving a similar envelope from a drawer. His, inked in the same blocky hand, accused him of poisoning patients. "Vicious nonsense," he muttered, but his voice held a tremor. "Half the village has had these. The vicar's wife, that fussy pie fellow, even the Symingtons." Jerry frowned. "Symingtons, the solicitor." Griffith nodded, pouring tea from a chipped pot. "Mona Symington got one last month. Something about her and another man. Richard was livid, but they're keeping it quiet." He paused, his gaze distant. "These letters aren't just spite. They're calculated. Someone's enjoying the chaos." Jerry, struck by the doctor's intensity, recalled Miss Marple's cryptic words about malice and purpose. "Any idea who?" he asked. Griffith shook his head. "Could be anyone. Lymstock looks idyllic, but grudges fester here like anywhere else." Back at Little Furze, Jerry found Joanna in the drawing-room, chatting with Megan Hunter, the Symingtons' stepdaughter. Megan, a lanky girl of 20 with a sallow face and nervous hands, had wandered over uninvited, her shyness melting under Joanna's warmth. Jerry, still brooding over the letter, mentioned it casually, watching Megan's reaction. Her eyes widened and she stammered, "Oh, we got one too." "Well, stepmother did. It was awful." She stopped, biting her lip, as if she'd said too much. Joanna, sensing her discomfort, changed the subject, but Jerry noted Megan's unease. Did she know something about the Symingtons' letter? That evening, Miss Jane Marple joined them for supper, her knitting bag tucked beside her chair. The meal, cold ham and salad, was simple, but Miss Marple's presence lent it an odd gravity. Jerry, unable to resist, showed her the letter. Her delicate fingers traced the scrawl, her expression unreadable. "Poison pen letters," she said, echoing her earlier remark, "are a peculiar evil. They thrive on fear, not truth." Joanna, pouring wine, leaned forward. "But why us? We're strangers here." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, met hers. "That's precisely why, my dear. Strangers are easy targets, no history, no allies. But the writer's aim may lie elsewhere," Jerry pressed her. "You think there's a pattern?" Miss Marple folded the letter, her movements deliberate. "Oh, there's always a pattern, Mr. Burton. These letters may seem random, but they're threads in a tapestry. The question is, what picture are they hiding?" She resumed knitting, her needles clicking like a metronome, and Jerry felt a chill unrelated to the spring air. The letter, crumpled in his pocket, seemed heavier now, a harbinger of something darker than village spite. Outside, Lymstock's lights twinkled, serene and deceptive, as if the village itself were holding its breath. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Suspicion. The morning mist clung to Lymstock's lanes, softening the edges of its stone walls and thatched roofs, as if the village sought to blur its own secrets. Jerry Burton, awake earlier than usual, stood at the window, of little furs, his breath fogging the glass. The anonymous letter, now tucked into a drawer, gnawed at him, not for its ludicrous accusation, but for the malice it implied. Joanna, still abed, had dismissed it as a prank. But Jerry sensed something uglier, a current running beneath the village's placid surface. Mrs. Price's gossip, Dr. Griffith's unease, and Miss Marple's cryptic hints all pointed to a disturbance that refused to stay hidden. Breakfast was a quiet affair, the clink of porcelain loud in the dining room. Joanna, descending in a green sweater, noticed his mood. "You're brooding, Jerry," she teased, buttering toast. "It's just a nasty letter. Don't let it spoil the country air." He forced a smile, unwilling to burden her with his growing disquiet. Instead, he proposed a walk to the high street, hoping activity might clear his mind. As they stepped out, the mist was lifting, revealing Lymstock in sharp detail. The grocer's boy whistling on his rounds, the church's weather vane glinting under a weak sun. Yet Jerry's eyes lingered on the faces they passed. A woman hurrying into the post office, a man glancing over his shoulder, each seeming to carry a private weight. At the Women's Institute, a stone building festooned with posters for a spring bazaar, they found Miss Emily Barton presiding over a meeting. Her delicate frame, swathed in lavender, moved among the chattering women, her smile as fragile as her heirloom brooch. Spotting the Burtons, she beckoned them in. "Mr. Burton, Miss Burton, how kind of you to visit. We're planning the bazaar. Such a cheerful event." Her voice trembled slightly, and Jerry wondered if the letters had reached her too. Before he could ask, Miss Jane Marple appeared, her knitting bag slung over one arm, her presence as unassuming as a sparrow, yet oddly commanding. "Miss Marple, you're staying on in Lymstock?" Joanna asked, surprised. The older woman nodded, settling into a chair. "For a little while, my dear. Miss Barton is most hospitable, and I find village life instructive." Her blue eyes twinkled, but Jerry caught a glint of purpose in them. As the meeting dispersed, Miss Barton drew Miss Marple aside, her whispers urgent. Jerry, lingering nearby, overheard snatches. "Another letter! Poor Mrs. Dane Calthrop! Quite shattered!" Miss Marple's response was too soft to catch, but her nod was grave. Tea followed at Miss Barton's cottage, a fussy parlour filled with antimacassars and faded photographs. Miss Barton, pouring from a silver pot, confided in Miss Marple, her voice low but audible to Jerry, who sat pretending to study a book. "It's dreadful, Jane. These letters have turned neighbour against neighbour. Mrs. Calthrop, she's such a strong soul, yet that letter broke her. Accused her of unspeakable things with a tradesman. And Mr. Pye, he's taken to his house like a hermit. Even I—" She faltered, her cup rattling. Miss Marple's hand, steady as her knitting, touched Miss Barton's. "You received one too, Emily." Miss Barton nodded, her cheeks flushing. "It called me a hypocrite, hoarding secrets. Me, I've lived openly all my life. Jerry, unable to stay silent, joined them. It's not just you, Miss Barton. We got one, and Dr. Griffith too. Seems no one spared." Miss Barton's eyes widened, but Miss Marple's remained calm, her needles clicking rhythmically. "A pattern, Mr. Burton," she said. "Malice spreads like ink in water, but it starts from a single point. The question is, where?" Joanna, sipping tea, leaned forward. "You think someone's orchestrating this, but why?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle yet piercing. "Human nature, my dear. Spite, envy, or something deeper. Perhaps a desire to unsettle, to distract. In my village, St. Mary Mead, we had such a case once. The letters were a curtain, hiding a far graver sin." Her words hung in the air, and Jerry felt a prickle at his neck. He wanted to press her, but Miss Barton's nervous cough shifted the conversation to the bazaar. As they left, Miss Marple's gaze met his, and he sensed she was watching Lymstock as keenly as a hawk watches a field. The walk home was brisk, Joanna chatting about the bazaar's cake stall, but Jerry's thoughts were elsewhere. The letters weren't random. Miss Marple's certainty had rooted that idea in him. But what were they hiding, and who stood to gain? That afternoon, Joanna proposed visiting the Symingtons, whose Georgian house stood at Lymstock's edge, its chimneys visible above yew hedges. "Megan's sweet if a bit lost," Joanna said, referring to the stepdaughter she'd befriended. "And I'm curious about Mrs. Symington. Everyone talks about her like she's a porcelain doll." Jerry agreed, hoping to learn more about the letter Griffith had mentioned. The Symingtons' maid, a prim girl named Agnes, ushered them into a drawing-room of polished mahogany and heavy drapes. Mona Symington, a slender woman with ash-blonde hair and a smile too perfect to be warm, greeted them. "How delightful," she said, her voice musical but strained. "Lymstock must seem dull after London." Richard Symington, entering behind her, was her opposite. Tall, stern, his solicitor's precision evident in his clipped speech. "Welcome, Mr. Burton, Miss Burton. I trust you're settling in." His grey eyes assessed Jerry, lingering on his stick, and Jerry felt a flicker of resentment at the pity he detected. Conversation turned to village life, but Jerry steered it toward the letters, mentioning their own. Mona's hand froze on her teacup, her smile faltering. "Oh, those horrid things," she said, her laugh brittle. "We had one too. Such nonsense. I burned it." Richard's face darkened. "Best forgotten," he said curtly. "They're the work of a coward." Megan, slouched in a corner, said nothing, her dark eyes darting between her stepmother and Jerry. Joanna, ever tactful, drew her out, asking about her sketches. Megan's shy response revealed a talent for drawing, but her glances at Mona held a wary edge. Jerry, observing, wondered about the family's dynamics. Mona's elegance seemed a performance, Richard's control a shield. As they left, Agnes lingered at the door, her expression troubled. "Sir," she whispered to Jerry, "it's not right, those letters. They're tearing things apart." Before he could reply, she vanished inside. Back at Little Furze, Jerry's unease grew. The Symingtons' letter, Mona's reaction, Agnes's cryptic words, all suggested a household under strain. He shared his thoughts with Joanna, who was brushing her hair at the dressing table. "Mona's hiding something," she said, pausing mid-stroke. "Did you see how she jumped when you mentioned the letter? And Megan, she's like a mouse in that house." Jerry nodded, recalling Miss Marple's talk of a hidden sin. "I think we need to know more about the Symingtons," he said, "and the other victims. There's a thread here, Joe, if we can find it." The next day Jerry sought out Mrs. Dane Calthrop, the vicar's wife, whose letter Miss Barton had mentioned. Her cottage, tucked behind the church, was a chaos of books and mismatched furniture, a stark contrast to the Symingtons' order. Mrs. Calthrop, a wiry woman with a direct gaze, welcomed him with a grunt. "Heard about your letter," she said, pouring tea so strong it looked like tar. "Same as mine. Filthy lies about me and the grocer, as if I'd bother." Her laugh was robust, but her hands shook slightly. "It's not the lie that stings," she admitted. "It's the hate behind it. Someone wants us all at each other's throats." Jerry asked if she suspected anyone. She shrugged, stirring her tea. "Could be anyone. Pye's got the spite for it, but he's too fussy to get his hands dirty. Amy Griffith, she's Owen's sister, all vim and vigour, might write one in a fit, but she'd sign it. No, this is sly work, Burton, sly and cruel." Her words echoed Miss Marple's, and Jerry felt the web tightening. He left the cottage, with a promise to keep her posted, his mind racing. Mrs. Calthrop's resilience masked real pain, and her mention of Amy Griffith intrigued him. The doctor's sister, he'd heard, was a force in the village, her energy as daunting as her brother's reserve. That evening, a chance encounter deepened the mystery. Jerry, walking alone near the churchyard, saw Mr. Pye, the reclusive bachelor, hurrying from his manor. Pye, a small man with a pinched face and florid waistcoat, started at Jerry's greeting. "Oh, Mr. Burton, out for a stroll? Fine evening, isn't it?" His voice was high, his eyes darting. Jerry, sensing opportunity, mentioned the letters. Pye's composure cracked, his hands twisting. "Dreadful business," he stammered. Yes, I had one. Accused me of unbecoming conduct. Lies, all lies." He fled before Jerry could probe further, leaving a scent of lavender and fear. De church, Little Furs, Jerry recounted the day to Joanna, who'd spent it with Megan, coaxing the girl to talk. "She's miserable," Joanna said, curling up on the sofa. "Says Mona's always perfect, but it's a strain. And Richard, he barely notices Megan. I think she knows something about their letter, but won't say." Jerry nodded, his thoughts circling back to Miss Marple. Her talk of a tapestry, of threads hiding a picture, felt truer now. The letters were a weapon, wielded with precision, but their target remained elusive. As night fell, Jerry stood at the window. Vids, village dark save for pinpricks of light. Lymstock's quiet was no longer soothing. It felt like a held breath, waiting for the next blow. Miss Marple's words echoed. A single point, a hidden sin. He resolved to watch closely, to trace the threads wherever they led. Somewhere in Lymstock's cottages and grand houses, someone was weaving a web of deceit, and Jerry, despite his limp and his doubts, was determined to unravel it. Chapter 4. A Tragic Turn. The April sky over Lymstock hung heavy with clouds, casting a pall over the village that mirrored the unease settling into Jerry Burton's bones. It was a week since the venomous letter had arrived at Little Furs, and though Joanna had tucked it away with a laugh, its shadow lingered. The village, with its neat gardens and polite nods, seemed to tighten like a coiled spring, each resident glancing sidelong, wary of the next poisoned missive. Jerry, sipping tea at the breakfast table, scanned the morning's post with a flicker of dread, but found only a bill and a letter from a London friend. Relief was fleeting. Mrs. Price's tales of widespread letters, targeting the vicars, wife, Mr. Pye, the Symingtons, hinted at a malice that spared no one. Joanna, breezing in with a scarf knotted jauntily, sensed his mood. "You're grim again, Jerry. Don't tell me you're still fretting over that silly letter." She poured coffee, her eyes dancing. "Let's call on Megan today. She's been cooped up with that icy stepmother of hers. A bit of fun might do her good." Jerry agreed, grateful for a distraction. The Symingtons' household intrigued him, especially after Agnes's whispered warning at their door. Mona's brittle charm and Richard's stern reserve suggested tensions the letters might have inflamed. As they strolled toward the high street, Lymstock stirred to life. The baker's van rumbled past. A woman swept her doorstep, and children darted toward the schoolhouse. Yet the air felt charged, as if the village held its breath. At the post office, Jerry paused to buy stamps, catching a snatch of conversation between two women. "Another letter, they say," one muttered, her voice low. "Poor Mrs. Symington, she's not been right since hers." The other shook her head. "It's a curse on us all." Jerry, paying for his stamps, felt their eyes on him, strangers still, despite their week in Lymstock. The Symingtons' house, with its Georgian symmetry and clipped lawns, loomed at the village's edge. Agnes, the maid, answered their knock, her face pale and eyes red-rimmed. "Miss Megan's in the garden," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the mistress, she's not receiving today." Her glance darted upstairs, and Jerry caught a tremor in her hands. Joanna, undeterred, led the way to the garden, where Megan slouched on a bench, sketching a gnarled apple tree. Her dark hair fell across her face, and her pencil moved with a feverish intensity that stilled as she saw them. "Joanna! Mr. Burton!" Megan's smile was shy but genuine. "I didn't expect you." Joanna plopped beside her, admiring the sketch. "You're awfully good, Megan. Why don't you show these at the bazaar?" Megan flushed, shaking her head. "Stepmother says it's childish. She wants me to learn bridge instead." Her tone held a bitterness that made Jerry glance at the house. The curtains were drawn, unusual for midday, and a stillness hung over the place, broken only by the distant bark of a dog. Their visit was cut short by a commotion from the house. Agnes appeared, wringing her apron, her voice shrill. "Miss Burton, sir, you'd best go. It's the mistress. Oh, it's terrible." Without waiting, she fled inside. Jerry, his heart lurching, followed, Joanna and Megan trailing. In the drawing-room, chaos reigned. Richard Symington stood rigid, his face ashen, while Dr. Owen Griffith knelt beside a chaise longue. On it lay Mona Symington, her elegant frame unnaturally still, her lips tinged blue. A crumpled note lay on the floor, and a glass, its contents, spilled, glinted on the carpet. Griffith looked up, his eyes grim. "She's gone. Cyanide, by the look of it." His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he closed Mona's staring eyes. Jerry, rooted to the spot, took in the scene. The pristine room, the note's stark words, "I can't go on," and Richard's silence, broken only by a choked sound as he turned away. Joanna, gripping Megan's arm, whispered, "What happened?" Agnes, hovering near the door, stammered, "I found her like this, miss, just now. She was fine this morning, I swear." The next hours blurred. Superintendent Nash, a broad man with a deceptively mild manner, arrived, his notebook filling with brisk scribbles. Servants and family were questioned in the dining room, its long table now a barrier between grief and inquiry. Richard, composed but distant, said little, confirming only that Mona had been unwell lately. Megan, trembling, clung to Joanna, her eyes wide with shock. Agnes, tearful, recounted serving Mona tea at 11, noticing nothing amiss. Nash's questions circled the note, its ink matching the anonymous letter's crude style, and the cyanide, traced to a bottle in Richard's study, used for legal seals. The inquest, held 2 days later in the village hall, drew a crowd. Lymstock's residents packed the benches, their whispers a low hum. Jerry, seated beside Joanna, watched as the coroner, a dour man with spectacles, sifted through evidence. Griffith testified to the cyanide's swift action, Nash to the notes, similarity to the poison pen letters. Richard, pale but steady, spoke of Mona's distress after receiving a letter weeks earlier, though he claimed she'd burned it. The note beside her body, he admitted, was new, its accusation, infidelity with an unnamed man, too vile to repeat. The coroner, peering over his glasses, ruled suicide, citing Mona's fragile state. The verdict landed like a stone, and the crowd dispersed, their murmurs tinged with unease. Jerry, walking home, felt the ruling sit poorly. Mona's death was too neat, the note too convenient. At Little Furze, he found Miss Jane Marple in the drawing-room, invited by Joanna for tea. The elderly woman, her knitting a soft rhythm, listened as Jerry recounted the inquest. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, narrowed at the mention of the note. "Suicide," she said softly, "is a tidy explanation, Mr. Burton. But tidiness can be deceptive." She set her needles down, her gaze distant. "Tell me, was Mrs. Symington's desk orderly? Her papers arranged?" Jerry frowned, picturing the scene. "Yes, oddly so. The glass was spilled, but her desk was spotless. Pens aligned, blotter clean." Miss Marple nodded, as if confirming a private thought. A woman in despair rarely tidies her desk before. Taking her life, it suggests deliberation. Joanna, pouring tea, leaned forward. "You think it wasn't suicide?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I think, my dear, that we must look beyond the obvious. Poison pen letters create a fog, and fog hides many things." Her words stirred Jerry's doubts into focus. He recalled Mona's strange smile, Richard's curt dismissal of the letters, Agnes's fear. "What about the cyanide?" he asked. "It was in Richard's study. Could someone else have taken it?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their click. "Accessibility is not intent, Mr. Burton. Cyanide is a lawyer's tool, but a murderer's weapon. We must ask, who had reason to wish Mrs. Symington gone?" Her tone was gentle, but Jerry felt a chill, as if she saw Lymstock's secrets laid bare. The village, in the days that followed, seemed to shrink under its grief. Shops closed early, conversations hushed at the Blue Boar. Jerry, restless, walked the lanes, noting the drawn curtains at Mr. Pye's manor, the tense set of Mrs. Calthrop's shoulders as she tended her garden. At the Symingtons, Megan, now staying with the Burtons at Joanna's insistence, was a ghost of herself, her sketches abandoned. Over supper, she spoke haltingly of Mona. "She was always so perfect," she said, her voice catching, But it made her cross, keeping everything just so. Father didn't notice, but I did. Joanna, ever perceptive, probed gently. Did she seem upset lately? Because of the letter? Megan's eyes flicked to her plate. She didn't talk about it, but she was different, sharper, like she was afraid. I heard her arguing with Father once about money. She stopped, her fingers twisting her napkin. Jerry, watching, sensed Megan knew more, but was too loyal or frightened to say. He changed the subject, but her words lingered, painting a picture of a household fraying long before the cyanide. A chance meeting with Amy Griffith, Dr. Griffith's sister, added another thread. Jerry encountered her on the high street, her sturdy frame striding toward the post office, her tweed hat at a jaunty angle. "Burton!" she called, her voice carrying. "Heard about poor Mona. Ghastly business." Her bluntness jarred, but her eyes held a flicker of concern. Jerry, seizing the moment, mentioned the letters. Amy's face hardened. "Childish nonsense," she said. "I'd have burned mine, but Owen kept it for that policeman. Accused me of meddling in village affairs. Me! If I wrote a letter, I'd sign it." Her laugh was forced, and Jerry wondered if her bravado masked unease. At Little Furs, Jerry shared his thoughts with Joanna, who was sorting Megan's sketches, a gesture to cheer the girl. "Amy's too loud to be sneaky," Joanna said, "but she's got a temper, and Megan's hiding something, I'd bet on it." Jerry nodded, his mind circling back to Miss Marple's fog metaphor. The letters, Mona's death, the cyanide, all were pieces of a puzzle, but the shape eluded him. He resolved to watch the Symingtons' household closer, to listen for what Megan left unsaid. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, Jerry sat by the fire, the inquest's verdict echoing in his mind. Suicide, the coroner had said, but Miss Marple's doubt had taken root. Mona's tidy desk, the note's familiar scrawl, the cyanide's convenient placement. Each detail suggested a hand guiding events, a mind weaving chaos to conceal a single act. Lymstock's quiet, once a balm, now felt like a shroud, hiding a truth that Jerry, with his pilot's instinct for patterns, was determined to uncover. Somewhere in the village's shadowed corners, a killer moved, and he would not rest until the fog lifted. Chapter 5. The Web Tightens. The rain that had begun the night of Mona Symington's death lingered into the following days, draping Lymstock in a grey veil that matched the village's mood. Jerry Burton, standing at the window of Little Furs, watched rivulets trace paths down the glass, his thoughts as tangled as the clouds above. The inquest's verdict, suicide, had settled over the village like damp ash, but it chafed against his instincts. Mona's pristine desk, the cyanide's convenient presence, and Miss Marple's quiet scepticism all pointed to a truth buried beneath the official story. The anonymous letters still circulating were no longer mere spite. They felt like a net tightening around Lymstock's secrets. Breakfast was subdued, the clatter of cutlery loud in the dining room. Joanna, spreading marmalade with forced cheer, glanced at Megan, who sat hunched over her plate. The girl, a guest at Little Furs since her stepmother's death, picked at her toast, her eyes shadowed. "Megan, you must eat," Joanna urged, her voice gentle. Megan managed a nod, but her silence spoke louder than words. Jerry, watching, sensed her grief was laced with something else. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. He resolved to speak with her later, away from Joanna's protective warmth. Knock at the door broke the quiet. Superintendent Nash, his overcoat slick with rain, stood on the threshold, his broad face set in lines of determination. "Mr. Burton, Miss Burton," he greeted, stepping inside. "I've questions about the Symington case, if you've a moment." His mild tone belied the sharpness in his eyes, and Jerry felt a prickle of anticipation. In the drawing-room, Nash settled into a chair, his notebook open. "The letters," he began. "They're still coming. One arrived at the vicarage yesterday, another at Pye's Manor. Same block capitals, same venom. But Mrs. Symington's death changes things. I'm not convinced it's suicide." Jerry leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "You think it's murder?" Nash's gaze was steady. "I'm keeping an open mind. The cyanide came from Mr. Symington's study, but anyone in the house could have taken it. Servants, family, even a visitor. And that note beside her, it matches the letter's style too closely for my liking." Joanna, perched on the sofa, frowned. "You mean the killer wrote it to make it look like suicide?" Nash nodded. "Possible, but it means the letters aren't just mischief. They're part of something bigger." He produced a letter, its envelope creased but intact, and passed it to Jerry. The scrawl was familiar, jagged capitals accusing Elsie Holland, the Symingtons' governess, of stealing. "From the household. This came to the vicar," Nash said. "Mrs. Calthrop burned hers, but he kept it. The handwriting varies. Some letters slant left, others right. But I reckon it's one person, disguising their hand." Jerry studied the paper, its cheapness, a contrast to its vicious intent. "What's the motive?" he asked. Nash shrugged. "Could be personal, a grudge against the village. Or it's a screen, hiding one crime among many. That's what I need to crack." As Nash spoke, Miss Jane, Marple, arrived, her umbrella dripping in the hall. Joanna had invited her for tea, but her timing felt providential. She settled beside Megan, her knitting bag at her feet, her eyes bright with interest. Nash, recognizing her reputation from a past case, welcomed her input. "Miss Marple, you've seen these poison pen cases before? What's your take?" She folded her hands, her smile serene yet piercing. "Superintendent, these letters are like a conjurer's trick. Flashy, distracting. But the real work happens off stage. Their content is nonsense, but their effect is chaos. Look for what they conceal, not what they say." Nash nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "You think they're covering a murder?" Miss Marple's needles clicked into motion. "And I think they create a fog, and in fog one may strike unseen. Mrs. Symington's death is the key. If it was murder, the letters ensured no one looked too closely at her household." Jerry, struck by her clarity, recalled Mona's strained demeanour, Richard's coldness. "Who benefits?" he asked. Miss Marple's gaze met his. "That, Mr. Burton, is the question. Money, love, freedom. Motives are as old as sin, but they're always personal." After Nash left, promising to interview the Symingtons' staff, Jerry walked Miss Marple to Miss Barton's cottage. The rain had eased, leaving puddles that mirrored the sky. "You're certain it's murder?" he said, not a question. She adjusted her shawl, her step surprisingly brisk. Certainty is a luxury, Mr. Burton, but I've seen despair, and it doesn't tidy its desk. Mrs. Symington was killed, and the letters are a veil. Watch the household, servants, children, even the governess. Someone knows more than they say. Her words, soft as the drizzle, landed with weight, and Jerry felt Lymstock's secrets pressing closer. Back at Little Furze, Jerry found Joanna in the garden, coaxing Megan to join her for a walk. The girl, bundled in a coat, seemed reluctant, but followed. Jerry seized the chance to visit the Symingtons' house, hoping to glean more from its inhabitants. Agnes, the maid, answered his knock, her face drawn. "Mr. Symington's at his office, sir," she said. "Miss Holland's with the boys, but you can wait." The drawing-room, where Mona had died, was eerily unchanged. The chaise longue gleamed. The carpet bore no trace of the spilled glass. Elsie Holland, entering with a toddler in tow, was a vision of wholesome beauty. Golden hair, clear blue eyes, but her smile was cautious. "Mr. Burton, how kind to call," she said, settling the child with a toy. "It's been difficult." Jerry, mentioning the letters to gauge her reaction, noted her flush. "I had one," she admitted, her voice low. "It said I was a thief. Mr. Symington was furious, but he told me to ignore it." Her fingers twisted a handkerchief, and Jerry sensed her unease went beyond the letter. "Did Mrs. Symington seem troubled before?" he asked. Elsie hesitated. "She was nervous, yes, always checking the post as if expecting something, but she never confided in me." Her eyes flicked to the door, and Jerry wondered what she withheld. As he left, Richard Symington arrived, his briefcase damp from the rain. His greeting was curt, his grey eyes assessing. "Burton, you're becoming a regular visitor." Jerry, undeterred, mentioned Nash's inquiries. Richard's jaw tightened. "The police are wasting time. Mona took her own life. Those letters drove her to it. Digging further only stirs gossip." His tone was final, but Jerry caught a flicker of strain, as if his control were a mask. Walking home, he mulled Richard's defensiveness. Was it grief, or fear of what Nash might uncover? The village, meanwhile, simmered with tension. At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Price served tea with a stream of gossip. A letter had accused the butcher of short-changing customers. Another taunted the schoolmaster for drunkenness. "It's like a plague," she said, her eyes gleaming with relish. Jerry, sipping his tea, overheard Mr. Pye at a nearby table, his voice high and querulous. "I tell you, it's a vendetta. My letter was obscene, me, a man of refinement." His companion, a dour farmer, grunted, "Burn it and be done, Pye. No good comes of dwelling." Pye's flush suggested he dwelled plenty, and Jerry filed away his agitation. That evening, Amy Griffith swept into Little Furze, her energy filling the drawing-room. She'd come to invite Joanna to the Women's Institute, but her talk soon turned to the letters. "Utter rot," she declared, tossing her hat onto a chair. "Mine said I was bullying the village, me, who only wants to help. If I find the coward behind this, they'll regret it." Her laugh was bold, but her eyes darted to Megan, who shrank into her chair. Jerry, watching, wondered if Amy's bluster hid a deeper wound. Her brother Owen, she mentioned, was fussing over the letters, urging her to stay calm. "He's too soft," she added, but her tone held affection. Megan, prompted by Joanna, spoke little, her answers monosyllabic. Yet, when Amy left, she lingered by the fire, her voice barely audible. "I saw stepmother burn her letter," she said, "but she was different after. She'd lock her door at night as if she was afraid of someone in the house." Her words, halting but heavy, sent a jolt through Jerry. "Did you tell Nash?" he asked. Megan shook her head, her eyes wide. "I couldn't. Father would be angry." Her fear was palpable, and Jerry resolved to protect her, sensing she held a key to the puzzle. At Miss Barton's cottage the next day, Jerry found Miss Marple alone, her knitting a cascade of soft wool. He shared Megan's revelation, watching her reaction. Her needles paused, her gaze sharpening. "Fear within a household," she mused, "is a dangerous thing, Mr. Burton. It suggests intimacy, a motive close to home. The letters may accuse wildly, but their true aim is to obscure one truth. Mrs. Symington's killer is likely someone she knew well." Her words, precise as her stitches, cut through Jerry's doubts. He pictured the Symington household. Richard's control, Elsie's caution, Agnes's nerves, Megan's secrets. One of them, he realized, was a thread in Miss Marple's tapestry. As he left, the rain had stopped, and Lymstock's rooftops gleamed under a tentative sun. The village seemed to exhale, but Jerry felt the net tightening. Nash's investigation, Megan's fear, Miss Marple's insight, all pointed to a truth buried in the Symingtons' grand house. The letters were a smokescreen, their chaos masking a calculated act. Jerry, his limp less noticeable in his resolve, vowed to watch closer, to listen for the unsaid. Lymstock's fog was thick, but he would find the hand that struck in its cover before it struck again. Chapter 6. A Village Unravelled. The spring days lengthened in Lymstock, but the village's charm withered under a creeping dread. The anonymous letters, relentless as the rain that had soaked the lanes, continued their poison, each one fraying the ties that bound neighbour to neighbour. Jerry Burton, nursing a cup of tea at Little Furze, felt the weight of Mona Symington's death and the letter's malice pressing against his resolve. Superintendent Nash's suspicion of murder, bolstered by Miss Marple's cryptic insights, had shifted his view of Lymstock. Its cottages and church spire, once quaint, now seemed to guard secrets as jealously as their inhabitants. Joanna, ever the optimist, tried to lift the gloom at breakfast. "We need a distraction, Jerry," she declared, slicing an apple with precision. "The village fetes tomorrow, cakes, games, all that cheer. Let's go, and drag Megan along. She's fading away in this house." Megan, seated across from them, managed a faint smile, but said nothing, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate. Her revelation about Mona's locked door and fear of someone in the household haunted Jerry. He nodded at Joanna's plan, hoping the fate might loosen tongues or reveal a clue in Lymstock's unravelling tapestry. The high street buzzed with preparations for the fete, bunting strung across shop fronts and children darting underfoot. At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Price served tea with a stream of gossip, her eyes alight. "Another letter, Mr. Burton," she confided, leaning close. "Old Mr. Cleet, the butcher, got one, said he's cheating on his scales. He near threw a cleaver at a customer yesterday." Her relish for scandal grated, but Jerry noted the detail. The letter's accusations, wild and varied, were eroding trust, turning Lymstock into a village of strangers. Seeking insight, Jerry called on Mrs. Dane Calthrop, the vicar's wife, whose blunt honesty he valued. Her cottage was a haven of clutter, books spilling from shelves and a fire crackling despite the mild weather. She greeted him with a wry smile, her wiry frame curled into an armchair. "You're after the letter writer, aren't you?" She said, pouring tea. "Well, you're not alone. Nash was here poking about. My letter was filth, but I've had worse in sermons." Her laugh was sharp, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of hurt. "It's the village I worry for," she added. "We're tearing ourselves apart, suspecting everyone." Jerry asked if she had suspects. Mrs. Calthrop stirred her tea, her gaze distant. "Pye's got the pettiness, but he's too vain to hide. Amy Griffith's got the nerve, but she's all bluster, no guile. Could be someone quiet, someone you'd never notice. That's the danger in a place like this." Her words echoed Miss Marple's talk of hidden sins, and Jerry felt the puzzle's edges sharpen. He left with a promise to see her at the fete, his mind turning to the Symingtons' household, where Megan's fear suggested a truth closer to home. That afternoon, Jerry and Joanna walked Megan to the churchyard, hoping fresh air might ease her strain. The girl, clutching a shawl, seemed to shrink from the village's gaze, her steps hesitant. At the lych gate they met Amy Griffith, her tweed jacket damp from an earlier shower. "Out for a jaunt?" she boomed, her energy undimmed by the village's mood. "Good for you, Megan. Get some colour in those cheeks." Megan flinched, and Jerry noted Amy's lack of tact. He mentioned the letters, probing for a reaction. Amy's face hardened. "Beastly things. Mine said I'm a tyrant, me, who only wants the best for Lymstock. I'd box the writer's ears if I caught them." Her indignation seemed genuine, but Jerry wondered if her forcefulness masked a deeper motive. As Amy strode off, Megan spoke, her voice barely audible. "She's always so loud. Stepmother didn't like her, said she meddled too much." Joanna, seizing the opening, asked, "Did Mona talk about the letters with anyone?" Megan shook her head, her eyes on the gravestones. "Not with me, but she was jumpy. Kept checking the windows like someone was watching." Her words, fragile but weighted, sent a chill through Jerry. He pressed gently, but Megan clammed up, her loyalty to her family, or fear, holding her back. The fete, held on the village green, was a burst of colour against the grey spring. Stalls offered jams and knitted scarves, children played hoopla, and a band played jaunty tunes. Yet the cheer felt brittle, conversations halting as eyes scanned the crowd. Jerry, with Joanna and Megan, wandered among the stalls, noting the villagers' strained smiles. Mr. Pye, resplendent in a velvet coat, manned a bookstall, but kept to himself, his earlier volubility gone. Mrs. Price, selling scones, whispered to a neighbour, her glance darting to Elsie Holland, who stood at a raffle table, her beauty drawing admiring looks. Miss Marple, seated near the tea-tent, observed the scene with a quiet intensity, her knitting a steady rhythm. Jerry joined her, leaving Joanna to coax Megan into a game. "A lively affair," Miss Marple remarked, her eyes on Amy Griffith, who was organising a tug-of-war with military precision. "But there's tension, Mr. Burton. Notice how they watch each other. Suspicion is a poison as potent as cyanide." Jerry nodded, sharing Megan's latest hint about Mona's fear. Miss Marple's needles paused. A locked door, a watched window, she mused. Mrs. Symington feared someone close, perhaps someone in her own house. The letters may have been a tool to unsettle her, to drive her to despair, or to mask a colder intent. Her words crystallized Jerry's suspicions. He scanned the crowd, his gaze lingering on Richard Symington, who stood apart, his face a mask of grief, or calculation. Elsie Holland, handing out raffle tickets, seemed oblivious to the whispers around her, but her smile was tight. Amy Griffith's laughter rang out, but it grated, as if forced. Even Megan, now tossing rings at a stall, seemed to carry a secret, her glances toward her father wary. Miss Marple followed his gaze. "Watch the small things, Mr. Burton," she said. "A gesture, a word, they reveal more than grand confessions." The fete ended with a sudden rain, scattering the crowd. Back at Little Furze, Jerry mulled over the day, his thoughts interrupted by a visit from Dr. Owen Griffith. The doctor, his face etched with fatigue, had come to check on Megan, but stayed for a brandy. "The village is cracking," he said, staring into the fire. "These letters, they're like a disease, turning us against each other." Jerry, seizing the chance, asked about the Symingtons. Griffith hesitated, then spoke. Mona was fragile, but not suicidal. "Richard, he's a cold fish, always was, and there was talk of money troubles, debts, I heard, though he'd never admit it." His words, guarded but revealing, added a new thread to the puzzle. As Griffith left, Jerry overheard a snatch of conversation at the Symingtons' gate, where Richard and a stranger, a man in a city suit, spoke in low tones. "It's settled then," Richard said, his voice sharp. "No more delays." The man nodded and vanished into the dusk, leaving Jerry to wonder. Money troubles, debts, a secretive meeting. Could these be the motive Miss Marple had hinted at? He resolved to share this with Nash, whose methodical approach might untangle the financial thread. The next day, a fresh letter arrived at Little Furze, its scrawl accusing Joanna of flirting with village men. She laughed, tossing it into the fire, but Jerry kept the envelope, noting its cheap paper and familiar capitals. He took it to Nash, who was at the police station, poring over a map of Lymstock. "Another one," Nash said, adding it to a pile. "I've traced the paper to a shop in Market Basing, but it's common stock, sold everywhere. The writer's clever, varying the hand, but I'll catch them." His determination was reassuring, but Jerry sensed the killer was steps ahead, weaving chaos to hide their tracks. At Miss Barton's cottage, Jerry found Miss Marple alone, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the rain outside. He shared Griffith's hint about Richard's debts and the stranger at the gate. Her eyes sharpened. "Money," she said, "is a motive as old as betrayal. If Mr. Symington faced ruin, his wife's death, perhaps with an inheritance, might have seemed a solution. But the letters suggest a broader plan, to muddy the waters." She paused, her needles still. "Consider the household, Mr. Burton. A governess, a maid, a stepdaughter. Each could know something, or be something more than they seem." Her words sent Jerry's mind racing. Elsie Holland's beauty, Agnes's nerves, Megan's fear, all were pieces of a mosaic. But the pattern eluded him. He left with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to watch the Symingtons' house closer. That evening, as Lymstock settled into a damp twilight, he stood at Little Furze's window. the village's lights blurred by rain. The fates forced gaiety, Griffith's revelations, Miss Marple's insights, all pointed to a truth hidden in plain sight. The letters were a net, drawing tighter, and Jerry, with his pilot's eye for detail, vowed to find the hand that cast it before Lymstock, unravelled completely. Chapter 7. The Second Death. The air in Lymstock carried a chill that went beyond the damp spring, as if the village itself shivered under the weight of its secrets. Jerry Burton, pacing the drawing-room of Little Furs, felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing day. Mona Symington's death, officially ruled a suicide, lingered like a discordant note, its echoes amplified by Superintendent Nash's suspicions and Miss Jane Marple's quiet certainty of murder. The anonymous letters still slipping through, letterboxes, had turned neighbour against neighbour, and Jerry sensed the village teetering on the edge of something darker. The fates' forced cheer had faded, replaced by whispers of new accusations, each one a thread in a web he was determined to untangle. Breakfast was a strained affair, the clink of teacups loud in the silence. Joanna, ever resilient, tried to rally Megan, who sat pale and withdrawn, her eyes fixed on a half-eaten scone. "We'll go sketching today, Megan," Joanna said, her voice bright. "The river's lovely in this light." Megan nodded faintly, but her gaze darted to the window as if expecting a shadow to loom. Jerry, watching, recalled her hint about Mona's fear of someone in the household. Her reticence frustrated him, but he sensed her loyalty, or terror, ran deep. He resolved to probe gently, hoping to coax out what she held back. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Price, the tea-shop proprietress, stood at the door, her apron askew, her face flushed with urgency. "Mr. Burton, Miss Burton, you must come quick. It's Agnes, the Symingtons' maid. She's been found dead." Her words hit like a blow, and Jerry's heart lurched. Joanna, rising, gripped Megan's shoulder, who gasped, her teacup rattling. "Dead?" Jerry asked, his voice sharp. Mrs. Price nodded, wringing her hands. "Stabbed, they say, in the kitchen. The police are there now. Oh, it's a curse on us all." Without a word, Jerry grabbed his coat, Joanna and Megan following. The Symingtons' house, usually a picture of Georgian order, was a scene of chaos. A constable stood at the gate, his face grim, while villagers clustered nearby, their whispers a low hum. Inside, Superintendent Nash directed 2 officers, his notebook already open. The kitchen, accessed through a side door, was a stark tableau. Agnes lay crumpled on the tiles, a knife beside her, blood pooling beneath her apron. Her eyes, wide with shock, stared at the ceiling, and Jerry felt a wave of nausea. Joanna, steadying Megan, turned the girl's face away, her own expression tight. Nash, spotting them, approached. "Burton, you're here quick. Bad business, this." His mild tone belied the intensity in his eyes. "Found her an hour ago. Elsie Holland came down for tea and screamed the house awake. Stabbed once, clean through the heart. No sign of a struggle." Jerry frowned, his mind racing. "Another letter." Nash nodded, producing an envelope from his pocket. The familiar block capitals accused Agnes of stealing from the Symingtons' pantry. "Delivered yesterday," Nash said. "She was shaken," Elsie says, "but wouldn't talk. I reckon she saw something tied to Mrs. Symington's death." Megan, trembling, spoke, her voice barely audible. Agnes was scared. She told me. She saw something odd the day stepmother died. She wouldn't say what. Her words, fragile but heavy, sent a jolt through Jerry. Nash's eyes sharpened. Why didn't she tell me? Megan shrank back. She was afraid, said it had caused trouble. Nash scribbled in his notebook, his jaw tight. Trouble's found her now. I'll need to talk to you later, Miss Hunter. Megan nodded, clinging to Joanna, who shot Jerry a look that said, she knows more. Richard Symington, summoned from his office, arrived pale and dishevelled. This is monstrous, he said, his voice clipped. First Mona, now Agnes. What's happening to this village? His grief seemed genuine, but Jerry caught a flicker of calculation in his eyes, as if he weighed each word. Elsie Holland, hovering nearby, was tearful but composed, her beauty undimmed by shock. Agnes was a good girl, she said, her voice soft. She'd been quiet lately, but I thought it was the letters. Jerry, watching her, wondered if her calm masked a deeper knowledge. Miss Marple, arriving with Miss Barton, took in the scene with her usual quiet authority. Her eyes, bright behind spectacles, lingered on the kitchen's pristine counters, the knife's polished handle. A terrible loss, she murmured, accepting Nash's invitation to view the body. Jerry, joining her, noted her scrutiny of the floor, where a single scuff mark marred the tiles. Too clean, she said softly, almost to herself. A kitchen in use should have crumbs, smudges. Someone tidied after the act. Her observation, sharp as her knitting needles, sent a chill through Jerry. He recalled her comment about Mona's tidy desk, a pattern of deliberation. As the coroner's men removed Agnes's body, Nash gathered the household in the drawing room. Richard, Elsie, and the Symington boys, too young to grasp the horror, sat stiffly, while Megan hovered near Joanna. Nash's questions were methodical. When was Agnes last seen? Who had access to the kitchen? Elsie confirmed Agnes was alive at supper, retiring early. Richard admitted the knife was from the kitchen block, accessible to all. Anyone could have taken it, he said, his tone defensive. Nash, undeterred, pressed Elsie about Agnes's mood. She was nervous, Elsie said, twisting her hands. Kept looking over her shoulder, like she expected trouble. Jerry, listening, recalled Agnes's whispered warning at the Symingtons' door. It's not right, those letters. Her fear, now silenced, suggested she'd stumbled onto a truth too dangerous to share. He shared this with Nash, who nodded grimly. She was a loose end, Burton. Someone made sure she wouldn't talk. The words hung heavy, and Jerry felt Lymstock's fog thickening, obscuring the killer's face. The village, already reeling from Mona's death, staggered under this new blow. At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Price's gossip reached fever pitch, her customers trading theories over tea. Agnes knew too much, one woman said, her voice low. Mark my words, it's tied to those letters. Mr. Pye, at a corner table, was subdued, his florid waistcoat at odds with his pallor. It's a vendetta, he muttered to no one, his earlier bravado gone. Jerry, sipping coffee, noted the fear in his eyes, wondering if Pye, too, hid a piece of the puzzle. Back at Little Furze, Joanna tried to comfort Megan, who sat by the fire, her sketchbook untouched. Agnes was kind, Megan whispered, tears spilling. She'd sneak me biscuits when stepmother wasn't looking. Why would anyone hurt her? Her grief was raw, but Jerry sensed guilt beneath it, as if she blamed herself for not speaking sooner. He knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Megan, what did Agnes see that day? You said it was odd." Megan's eyes widened, her hands twisting. She wouldn't tell me, only that it was wrong. Something in the study, I think. She said she'd tell the police, but then her voice broke, and Joanna pulled her close, shooting Jerry a warning glance. Determined to act, Jerry visited Nash at the police station, where evidence bags lined a table. The knife, wiped clean of prints, offered no clues, but the letter to Agnes matched the others in style. "It's one person," Nash said, rubbing his temples. "The hand changes, but the phrasing's too similar. Same spite, same flourish. I'm checking alibis for last night, but the kitchen's too open. Anyone could have slipped in." Jerry shared Megan's hint about the study, and Nash's eyes narrowed. Symington's study, where the cyanide was kept. If Agnes saw something there, it ties the deaths together. I'll search it tomorrow. That evening, Jerry called on Miss Marple, finding her at Miss Barton's cottage, her knitting a cascade of soft wool. The parlour, lit by a single lamp, felt like a sanctuary from Lymstock's turmoil. He recounted Agnes's death, the scuff mark, Megan's cryptic words. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. "A second death," she said, "is no coincidence, Mr. Burton. Agnes was a threat, silenced to protect a secret. The study is significant. Cyanide, papers, perhaps a motive. But consider who gains. A death, even two, serves a purpose." Her words, precise as her stitches, cut through Jerry's fog of doubt. He pressed her. "You think it's someone in the Symington house?" She folded her hands, her smile enigmatic. "I think, Mr. Burton, that evil wears a familiar face. The letters create suspicion. But the killer is close to Mona, to Agnes, to the heart of that household. Watch the living, not just the dead." Her advice, laced with quiet authority, sent Jerry's mind racing. Richard's debts, Elsie's guarded calm, Megan's fear. All were threads, but the pattern remained elusive. The next day, Lymstock seemed to hold its breath. Shops half empty, conversations hushed. At the Symingtons' gate, Jerry saw May Griffith, her stride purposeful as she delivered a parcel. "Dreadful about Agnes," she said, pausing to chat. "I told Owen it's no prank now. Someone's unhinged." Her bluntness was disarming, but Jerry noted her quick glance at the house, as if gauging its mood. He asked about the study, probing for a reaction. May shrugged. "Richard's fussy about it, keeps it locked, always has. Mona used to joke. He hid treasures there." Her laugh was forced, and Jerry filed away her comment, wondering what treasures, or secrets, Richard guarded. Back at Little Furze, Joanna reported a tense exchange at the grocer's, where Mrs. Price's husband had quarrelled with a neighbour over a letter's claim of theft. "The village is splintering," she said. Her usual spark dimmed, and Megan's worse. She barely speaks now. Jerry, frustrated, felt the killer's hand tightening its grip. He resolved to join Nash's search of the study, hoping it held the key to Agnes's silenced truth. As night fell, Lymstock's lights flickered like wary eyes, and Jerry stood at the window, the weight of two deaths pressing against him. "The letters were a veil," Miss Marple had said. and he would tear it aside, no matter the cost, before another life was claimed. Chapter 8. The motive emerges. The spring dusk settled over Lymstock with a heaviness that matched the village's mood, its lanes dim and hushed, as if mourning the losses of Mona Symington and Agnes, the maid. Jerry Burton, seated by the fire, in Little Furz's drawing-room, felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing against him. The anonymous letters, a plague of spite, had fractured Lymstock's fragile harmony, and Agnes's brutal death, stabbed in the Symingtons' pristine kitchen, had shattered any lingering pretence of safety. Superintendent Nash's dogged pursuit of a murderer, bolstered by Miss Jane Marple's piercing insights, had convinced Jerry that both deaths were linked, woven into a tapestry of deceit where the letters served as a cunning veil. Joanna, curled on the sofa with a novel, glanced at Megan, who sat sketching listlessly, her pencil scratching faint lines. The girl's presence, a constant since Mona's death, was both a comfort and a puzzle. Her halting revelations about Mona's fear and Agnes's cryptic warning hinted at truths she dared not voice. "Megan," Joanna said softly, "why don't you draw something cheerful? A flower, perhaps?" Megan's lips twitched, but her eyes remained dull. "I can't," she murmured. "It's all wrong now." Jerry, watching, sensed her grief was tangled with guilt, as if she bore a secret, too heavy for her slight frame. A tap at the door heralded Miss Marple, her shawl draped neatly despite the damp evening. Joanna had invited her for tea, sensing her knack for cutting through Lymstock's fog. The elderly woman settled into an armchair, her knitting bag at her feet, her blue eyes sharp behind spectacles. "A troubled time," she said, accepting. "A cup. 2 deaths, and the village reeling. Yet there's a pattern, Mr. Burton, if we can but see it." Her voice, gentle yet firm, stirred Jerry's resolve. He recounted Agnes's murder, the knife's clean handle, the scuff mark in the kitchen, and Megan's hint about the study. Miss Marple's needles clicked, a metronome to her thoughts. The study, she mused, where the cyanide was kept, and Agnes saw something there. Something wrong? It suggests a connection, a thread from Mrs. Symington's death to this poor girl's. Jerry leaned forward, his tea forgotten. "You think the killer's in the Symington household?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I think, Mr. Burton, that murder is intimate. The letters cast a wide net, accusing all and sundry. But their purpose is narrow. To hide one act, one motive. We must look to those closest to the victims." Joanna, intrigued, set her book aside. "But who? Richard's so controlled. Elsie Holland's all sweetness, and Megan's too timid. The boys are just children." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Control can mask desperation, my dear. Sweetness can hide ambition, and timidity can conceal knowledge. As for children, they see more than we think. But let us consider the facts." She sipped her tea, her gaze distant. Mrs. Symington died by cyanide, staged as suicide with a note in the letter's style. Agnes, who saw something in the study, was stabbed before she could speak. The killer is methodical, using the letters to sow chaos, ensuring suspicion falls everywhere but on them. Jerry nodded, his mind racing. The cyanide was Richard's, for legal work. Could he have? Miss Marple's eyes met his. "Possibility is not proof, Mr. Burton. Cyanide is a tool, not a signature. but consider motive. Money, love, freedom, these drive murder. If Mr. Symington faced ruin, his wife's death might bring relief, perhaps an inheritance, or perhaps another sought to clear a path, to him or to something else. Her words, precise as her stitches, painted a picture of a household rife with hidden tensions. She turned to Megan, her tone gentle. "My dear, you said Agnes spoke of the study. Did she mention anyone? Your father, Miss Holland, perhaps a visitor?" Megan's pencil stilled, her knuckles white. "No," she whispered. "She just said it was wrong, and she'd tell the police. I begged her not to because it'd upset Father." Her voice broke, and Joanna squeezed her hand, shooting Jerry a look that urged caution. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "Fear is a powerful silencer," she said, "but truth will out in time." Determined to test Miss Marple's theory, Jerry visited Nash the next morning at the police station, a squat building smelling of ink and damp wood. The superintendent was sorting letters, their envelopes a grim collection. "We searched the study," Nash said, rubbing his eyes. "Found the cyanide bottle, half empty, but no prints. Symington swears it was locked, but the keys on a ring anyone could have taken. Papers were in order, legal documents, bills, nothing suspicious. But Agnes's death tells me we missed something." Jerry shared Megan's hint and Miss Marple's theory of a domestic motive. Nash's jaw tightened. "Symington's clean, on paper, but I've heard whispers of debts, big ones. If Mona had money, her death might have solved that." The mention of debts echoed Dr. Griffith's earlier hint, and Jerry resolved to probe further. He called on Griffith at his cottage, finding the doctor in his garden, pruning roses with a distracted air. "Bad business, Agnes," Griffith said, wiping his hands. "She was a nervous girl, but harmless. Owen thinks the killer's panicking, tying up loose ends." Jerry mentioned the study, watching for a reaction. Griffith frowned. "Richard's fussy about that room. Always locked, even from Mona. She'd complain he spent more time with his ledgers than her." His tone was casual, but Jerry caught a flicker of unease, as if Griffith knew more than he said. The village, meanwhile, was a cauldron of suspicion. At the grocer's, Jerry overheard a quarrel between two women, one accusing the other of writing a letter claiming infidelity. "You've always envied me," the accused snapped, her voice shrill. The grocer, intervening, looked weary, as if Lymstock's fractures were beyond repair. Mr. Pye, spotted crossing the high street, was a shadow of his flamboyant self, his eyes darting as if expecting another letter. Even Mrs. Calthrop, usually indomitable, seemed subdued, her garden neglected as she brooded over the village's woes. Seeking another perspective, Jerry visited Amy Griffith, whose energy seemed undimmed by the murders. She was at the Women's Institute, sorting donations for a charity drive, her tweed skirt a blur of motion. "Burton," she called, waving him over. "You look like you've seen a ghost. It's this wretched business, isn't it?" Her bluntness was refreshing, but Jerry probed carefully, mentioning Agnes's death. Amy's face hardened. "Horrible! She was a mouse, that girl, but she didn't deserve a knife. I told Owen it's someone with a grudge, someone who hates Lymstock's order." Her theory, vague but passionate, rang hollow, and Jerry wondered if her forcefulness hid a personal stake. He steered the conversation to the Symingtons. "Richard's holding up," Amy said, stacking books, "but he's always been a cold fish." Mona was the spark, though she'd been off lately, snappy, not herself. "I thought it was the letter, but maybe it was more." Her eyes flicked to Jerry, as if gauging his reaction. "And Elsie Holland. Pretty thing, but too good to be true, if you ask me." Her tone held a trace of envy, and Jerry filed it away, sensing Amy's dislike of the governess might reveal more in time. Back at Little Furs, Joanna reported a troubling encounter with Megan, who'd broken down while sketching. She said Agnes was her only friend in that house, Joanna said, her voice low. "She feels responsible, Jerry, like she should have stopped her from talking. I think she's protecting someone, maybe Richard." Her words, heavy with concern, spurred Jerry to act. He arranged a meeting with Nash and Miss Marple at Miss Barton's cottage, hoping to piece together the fragments. The parlour, warmed by a fire, was a haven from Lymstock's chill. Miss Marple, knitting a scarf, listened as Jerry outlined the clues. Richard's debts, Mona's fear, Agnes's sighting in the study, the letter's relentless spread. Nash, pacing, added his findings. No new leads on the knife, but a witness. A delivery boy saw a figure near the Symingtons' kitchen at dusk, too vague to identify. Miss Marple's needle stilled, her gaze piercing. "A domestic motive," she said, "is the heart of this superintendent. The letters are a smokescreen designed to obscure Mrs. Symington's murder. Agnes's death confirms it. She saw the killer's hand, perhaps literally, in the study." She leaned forward, her voice steady. "Consider the sequence. Mrs. Symington is poisoned. The cyanide staged as a suicide with a forged note. The letters sent before and after create a village-wide scandal, ensuring no one looks closely at her death. Agnes, witnessing something, perhaps the cyanide's theft or a meeting, becomes a threat. Her murder, swift and brutal, silences her. The killer is someone with access, with motive, and with the cunning to use the letters as a shield." Nash nodded, scribbling furiously. "Symington's the obvious one. Debts, control of the cyanide, and Mona's money. But Elsie Holland's in that house, and she's no fool. Even the girl Megan could be hiding something." Miss Marple's smile was faint. "Megan knows more than she says, but I doubt she's the hand that struck. Look to the adult superintendent. A man desperate for money, a woman seeking love or power. The study holds the key, but so does the heart of that household." Her words, laced with quiet authority, sent a jolt through Jerry. He pictured Richard's stern face, Elsie's guarded beauty, the locked study with its secrets. "What about an affair?" he asked, recalling village whispers about Mona. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A possibility, Mr. Burton. Love complicates motives, but it rarely acts alone. Money and freedom are surer bets." The meeting ended, with Nash vowing to research the study and question Elsie again. Jerry, walking home through the drizzle, felt the puzzle's edges sharpening. Richard's debts, hinted at by Griffith and confirmed by Nash, suggested a motive for Mona's death. Her inheritance, perhaps, or an insurance policy. Agnes's murder, tied to the study, pointed to a killer desperate to cover their tracks. Yet the letter's scope, accusing Pye, Aimee, even strangers, implied a broader plan. a mind revelling in chaos. That night, Lymstock seemed to close in, its lights dim through the mist. At Little Furze, Megan slept fitfully, her sketchbook open to a drawing of the Symingtons' house, its windows dark and menacing. Joanna, reading by the fire, looked up as Jerry entered. "She's breaking, Jerry," she said. "Whatever. She knows it's eating her. We need to help her before it's too late." Jerry nodded, his resolve hardening. Miss Marple's tapestry was taking shape, its threads, money, fear, betrayal, pointing to a killer in the Symingtons' orbit. He would watch, listen, and wait, knowing the next move could unravel Lymstock's deadly web, or tighten it further. Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The twilight over Lymstock was a bruise of purple and grey, the village's lanterns flickering like wary eyes against the encroaching dark. Jerry Burton stood at the window of Little Furze, his reflection a ghostly outline. In the glass, his thoughts knotted with the weight of 2 murders, Mona Symington's poisoned end and Agnes's brutal stabbing. The anonymous letters, a venomous tide, had eroded Lymstock's trust, and Miss Jane Marple's conviction that they masked a calculated killer had taken root in Jerry's mind. Superintendent Nash's relentless probing, paired with Megan's whispered fears, pointed to a truth hidden in the Symington household, where motives of money, love, or desperation festered. Tonight, with the village dance looming, Jerry sensed an opportunity to stir the killer's hand. The drawing room was warm, the fire casting shadows that danced across Joanna's fair hair as she adjusted Megan's dress. The girl, pale and reluctant, had agreed to attend the dance, a charity event at the village hall, only under Joanna's coaxing. "You'll look lovely, Megan," Joanna said, pinning a ribbon in her dark curls. "A night out will do you good." Megan's smile was fleeting, her eyes darting to Jerry as if seeking rescue. He offered a nod, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Miss Marple's latest counsel. "The killer is close, Mr. Burton. A trap, carefully baited, may draw them out." Her words, delivered over tea at Miss Barton's, had sparked a plan. One he'd shared with Nash, who'd agreed with cautious enthusiasm. Breakfast that morning had been a quiet affair, Megan's silence a stark contrast to Joanna's chatter about the dance's decorations. Jerry, sipping coffee, had watched the girl, her fingers twisting a napkin, and wondered what she withheld. Her hints about Mona's locked door and Agnes's sighting in the study suggested a secret she feared to voice, perhaps tied to her father, Richard. Jerry had resolved to speak with her alone, but first he needed to set the trap Miss Marple had inspired, a rumour carefully spread to unsettle the killer. He'd visited Nash at the police station, a cramped room cluttered with files, and the faint scent of tobacco. The superintendent, poring over a map of Lymstock, looked up as Jerry entered. "Any news, Burton?" he asked, his mild tone belying the strain in his eyes. Jerry outlined the plan. He'd let slip at the dance that he'd received a new letter, one hinting at the killer's identity. Too vague to act on, but enough to alarm the culprit. "If they're watching," Jerry said, "they'll react, maybe slip up." Nash rubbed his chin, sceptical but intrigued. "Risky, but worth a shot. I'll have men at the dance, plain clothes. If anyone bolts or acts odd, we'll see it." He paused, handing Jerry a fresh letter, its capitals accusing the schoolmaster of bribery. "Another one." Nash said. "The writer's not slowing down." With the plan set, Jerry called on Miss Marple, finding her in Miss Barton's garden, pruning roses with a delicate touch. Her shawl fluttered in the breeze, but her gaze was steady as he shared the trap. "A bold move," she said, snipping a wilted bloom, "but effective, if the killer is as cautious as I suspect. They've woven a web of letters to hide their crime, Mr. Burton. A threat to their anonymity may force a mistake." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "But be wary. A cornered creature is dangerous, and this one has killed twice." Her warning, soft as the petals at her feet, sent a chill through Jerry, but he nodded, determined to see it through. The village hall, decked with bunting and lit by chandeliers, was a blaze of forced gaiety as the dance began. Couples twirled to a lively band, their smiles brittle under the weight of Lymstock's tragedies. Jerry, leaning on his stick, scanned the crowd, noting familiar faces. Mrs. Calthrop, her wiry frame swaying with the vicar. Mr. Pye, resplendent in a silk cravat, but subdued, his eyes darting. Amy Griffith, leading a reel with her usual gusto, her laughter loud but strained. Richard Symington stood near the punch bowl, his face a mask of civility, while Elsie Holland, radiant in blue, danced with a young farmer, her grace drawing admiring glances. Joanna, in a crimson gown, guided Megan through the throng, the girls, reluctance evident in her hunched shoulders. Jerry caught her eye, offering a reassuring nod, then began his work. At the refreshment table, he leaned close to Mrs. Price, whose gossip was a village institution. "Got another letter today," he said, his voice low but clear. "Odd one, hinted at who's behind all this, but it's too vague to be sure. Still, it's unsettling." Mrs. Price's eyes widened, her cup trembling. "Oh, Mr. Burton, you must tell Nash." He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Not enough to go on yet, but it's got me thinking." She nodded, already turning to whisper to a neighbour, and Jerry knew the rumour would spread like wildfire. He repeated the tale to Dr. Griffith, who was nursing a drink in a corner, his tired face creasing with concern. "A hint, you say? Dangerous to sit on that, Burton." His tone was guarded, and Jerry wondered if his unease stemmed from more than professional worry. Amy, overhearing, snorted. "Letters! I'd burn the lot and thrash the writer. You're too patient, Burton." Her bluster, as always, seemed a shield, but her glance at Richard Symington was sharp, as if she suspected him of something. Jerry moved on, dropping the rumour with the grocer, the schoolmaster, and a cluster of women near the band, each time watching for a reaction. A flinch, a too-quick denial. Richard Symington, when Jerry approached, was polite but distant, his grey eyes assessing. "Another letter," he said, his voice clipped. "You do well to ignore it, Burton. They're poison, nothing more." His fingers tightened on his glass, and Jerry noted the strain in his jaw, a crack in his solicitor's composure. Elsie Holland, joining them, smiled faintly. "It's awful, isn't it? All these letters, and now. Poor Agnes." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were dry, and Jerry wondered if her grief was as deep as she claimed. Megan, clinging to Joanna nearby, watched her father with a wary intensity, her silence louder than words. Miss Marple, seated in a corner with Miss Barton, observed the scene with her usual quiet acuity, her knitting a soft rhythm. Jerry joined her, sharing the rumour's progress. "It's taken hold," he said, nodding toward Mrs. Price, who was now whispering to a group by the door. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Well done, Mr. Burton. A stone in a pond sends ripples, and we shall see who flinches. But watch closely. Tonight may reveal more than you expect." Her gaze drifted to the Symingtons, then to Aimee, who was arguing loudly with her brother, her gestures sharp. "Passion," Miss Marple murmured, "can be a mask, but so can restraint." As the dance wore on, the atmosphere grew taut, the music unable to drown out the undercurrent of suspicion. Jerry, moving through the crowd, caught snatches of conversation. Burton's letter knows something. Dangerous game. The rumour had spread, as planned, and he felt the killer's gaze, imagined or real, prickling his neck. Nash's men, disguised as guests, lingered near the exits, their eyes scanning. For a telltale move, Joanna, twirling Megan in a slow waltz, whispered to Jerry as they passed. "She's terrified, Jerry. Said her father's been strange. Late-night walks, locked doors. I think she's scared of him." Her words, urgent but low, sent a jolt through Jerry, reinforcing his suspicion of Richard. The band struck up a lively jig, and the floor filled, bodies swaying in a semblance of joy. Jerry, stationed near the punch bowl, watched Richard excuse himself, his face pale as he slipped toward a side door. Elsie followed a moment later, her glance back at the crowd, furtive. Aimee, breaking off her argument with Owen, stormed to the refreshment table, her face flushed. "This village is a nest of vipers," she muttered, pouring punch with a trembling hand. Jerry, probing, mentioned his letter again. Aimee's eyes narrowed. "You're stirring trouble, Burton. Be careful it doesn't bite you." Her warning, half threat, half concern, lingered as she turned away. Midnight approached, and the dance reached a fevered pitch, the hall a swirl of colour and heat. Jerry, his leg aching, stepped outside for air, the night cool against his skin. The garden behind the hall was dark, save for the glow of a lantern near the gate. A rustle in the shrubs made him pause, his pulse quickening. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite the prickle of fear. No answer came, but a shadow moved, swift and silent, toward the lane. Before he could follow, Nash appeared, his face grim. "Got something, Burton. One of my men saw a figure slip into your garden at Little Furze. Left this." He held up an envelope, its capitals stark. "Keep your nose out, or you'll end like Agnes." Jerry's blood ran cold, but triumph surged too. The trap had worked. The letter, crude and rushed, was a sign of panic, proof the killer felt, the net tightening. Nash clapped his shoulder. "We'll dust it for prints, but it's a start. My man's tracking the figure. Too dark to see clear, but we'll know soon." Jerry nodded, his mind racing. The killer had taken the bait, but their identity remained a shadow, flitting through Lymstock's fog. Back inside, the dance was winding down, couples drifting to the exits. Richard returned, his coat damp as if he'd been outside, his expression unreadable. Elsie, at his side, avoided Jerry's gaze, her smile tight. Megan, clinging to Joanna, whispered, "Father was gone a long time. He's been meeting someone late at night. I saw him from my window." Her voice, barely audible, sent a chill through Jerry. He shared her words with Nash, who was coordinating with his men near the cloakroom. "Symington's our man, I'd wager," Nash said. "But we need proof. This letter's a step, but it's not enough." Miss Marple, preparing to leave with Miss Barton, caught Jerry's eye. "A bold night's work," she said, her voice low. "The killer is rattled, Mr. Burton, but not caught. Watch the Symingtons. Father, governess, daughter. One holds the key, and tonight has loosened their guard." Her words, laced with quiet certainty, spurred Jerry's resolve. He escorted Joanna and Megan home, the new letter heavy in his pocket, its threat a goad to action. At Little Furze, the fire had died to embers, and Lymstock's silence was a heavy shroud. Megan, exhausted, retired, but Joanna lingered, her face pale. "It's Richard, isn't it?" she said, her voice low. "Megan's terrified of him, and that letter, it's too close." Jerry nodded, his jaw tight. The trap had stirred the killer, but the dance had revealed more. Richard's absence, Elsie's furtiveness, Megan's fear. The Symington household was a crucible, and Jerry, with Nash and Miss Marple's guidance, would force its secrets into the light, before the shadows struck again. Chapter 10. The Truth Unveiled. The dawn broke over Lymstock with a fragile clarity, the mist lifting to reveal a village scarred by suspicion and loss. Jerry Burton, sleepless at Little Furze, stood by the window. The forged letter from the village. Dance. Keep your nose out, or you'll end like Agnes, burning in his mind. The trap, set with Superintendent Nash, and inspired by Miss Jane Marple's keen insight, had provoked the killer. But their identity remained a shadow, flitting through the fog of anonymous letters and 2 murders. Mona Symington's staged suicide and Agnes's brutal stabbing pointed to a cunning hand, and Megan's whispered fears, coupled with Richard Symington's guarded demeanour, suggested the truth lay within their grand Georgian house. Today, Jerry vowed that truth would be dragged into the light. The drawing room was quiet, the fire unlit, as Joanna prepared tea, her usual brightness dimmed by the night's tension. Megan, curled in an armchair, clutched a sketchbook, her pencil idle. Her revelation at the dance, Richard's late-night meetings, her terror of him, had hardened Jerry's suspicion. "Megan," he said gently, sitting beside her, "you said your father's been meeting someone. Can you tell me more?" Her eyes, wide with dread, met his. "I saw him from my window 2 nights ago. He went to the summer house with someone in a coat. They whispered. Then he came back alone. I didn't see who." Her voice trembled, and Joanna, setting down the teapot, squeezed her shoulder. "You're safe here, Megan, but you must tell Nash." Jerry nodded, his resolve firm. The summer house, a detail Megan hadn't shared before, was a new thread in Miss Marple's tapestry. He telephoned Nash, who was at the police station, sifting through the dance's evidence. "No prints on the letter," Nash said, his voice weary. "But my man tracked the figure to the lane behind your place. Lost them in the dark. Symington's looking likely, Burton. His alibi for Agnes's death is thin. He claims he was in his study, alone. And those debts Griffith mentioned, I've confirmed them. He owed thousands, more than his practice could cover." Jerry shared Megan's account of the summer house, and Nash's tone sharpened. "That's something. I'll search it today and bring Symington in for questioning. Meet me at Miss Barton's at noon. Miss Marple's got a mind for this." Before leaving, Jerry checked on Megan, who was sketching again, her lines jagged. "Don't tell father I said anything," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. "He'd be so angry." Jerry promised, but her fear fueled his urgency. At Miss Barton's cottage, the parlour was a haven of chintz and warmth. Miss Marple's knitting a steady rhythm as she greeted him and Nash. Her eyes, bright behind spectacles, took in their tension. "A productive night, gentlemen?" she asked, pouring tea. Jerry recounted the dance, the forged letter, and Megan's summer-house sighting. Nash added his findings. Richard's debts, his shaky alibi, and the lack of prints, suggesting a killer meticulous in their craft. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. "Mr. Symington," she said, "is a man under pressure. Debts, a strained marriage, a household of watchers." The letters, with their wild accusations, ensured no one looked too closely at his wife's death. Agnes, seeing something in the study, perhaps the cyanide's theft, was a threat he could not ignore. Jerry leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "You think he killed them both?" Her smile was faint. "I think, Mr. Burton, that the truth is in the details. The cyanide was his, the study his domain. But we must consider others. Miss Holland, whose beauty may hide ambition, or even an outsider drawn into his orbit. The summer-house meeting is key. Who was there, and why?" Nash, scribbling in his notebook, nodded. "I'll search it now, and haul Symington in. If he's our man, he'll crack under pressure." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Be cautious, Superintendent. A man who kills twice is no fool. He's used the letters to cloak his crimes, forging one last night to silence Mr. Burton. But fear makes mistakes. Press him, but watch his household too." Her words, laced with quiet authority, sent a jolt through Jerry. He pictured Elsie Holland's guarded smile, Megan's trembling hands, the summer-house's dark corners. The killer was close, and the trap had rattled them. The search of the summer-house, conducted that afternoon, yielded a slim clue. A cigarette stub, its brand foreign to Lymstock, half buried in the gravel. Nash bagged it, his face grim. "Could be nothing, but Symington doesn't smoke. I'll trace it." He left for the Symingtons' house, where Richard awaited, his solicitors calm, fraying under Nash's summons. Jerry, unable to stay idle, walked the village, its lanes eerily quiet. At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Price served tea with a stream of gossip, her eyes gleaming. "They're saying it's Mr. Symington," she whispered. "All those debts, and now Agnes. Folk reckon he's lost his mind." Jerry, sipping his tea, let her talk, noting the village's shift from suspicion to certainty. Dr. Owen Griffith, spotted crossing the high street, paused to greet Jerry, his face etched with strain. "Heard about the summer house?" he said, his voice low. "Nash thinks it's Richard, doesn't he? I warned him about those debts. Mona knew, and it ate at her. She'd talk of leaving, but never did." His words, unguarded, added weight to Richard's motive. Jerry probed about Elsie Holland, recalling Amy's dislike. Griffith shrugged. "She's a looker, and Richard's not blind." Mona noticed too, made sharp remarks about the governess's heirs. "But murder? I can't see it." His doubt, tinged with unease, left Jerry wondering if Elsie's role was more than peripheral. The confrontation came that evening at the police station, where Nash had summoned Richard Symington. Jerry, invited as a witness, stood by the door, his stick a steadying weight. Richard, seated across from Nash, was pale but composed, his grey eyes cold. "This is absurd," he said, his voice clipped. "I loved my wife, and Agnes was a loyal servant. You've no evidence, only village gossip." Nash, unfazed, laid out the case. The cyanide from his study, his debts, Agnes's sighting, the summer house meeting. "You were seen," Nash said, tapping the cigarette stub. "Who was with you, and what were you planning?" Richard's jaw tightened, but he held firm. "I was alone, working late. The debts are real, but I'm managing. Mona's death was a tragedy, not a scheme. As for Agnes, I was in my study when she was killed. Elsie can confirm I never left." His alibi, delivered with lawyerly precision, rang hollow, and Jerry caught a flicker of fear in his eyes. Nash pressed, mentioning the forged letter at Little Furze. "Someone's desperate to stop Burton. If not you, who?" Richard's composure cracked, his hands clenching. "I don't know. These letters are a madness I can't fathom." Marple, arriving at Nash's request, took a chair in the corner, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the tension. Her presence, unassuming yet commanding, shifted the room's dynamic. "Mr. Symington," she said, her voice gentle, "a man in your position, respected, burdened, might see no way out but a desperate act. The letters, so cleverly varied, suggest a mind trained in precision, like a solicitor's. Did you write them to hide a greater sin?" Richard's face flushed, his voice rising. "That's preposterous. I'm a victim, not a villain." But his protest, too vehement, betrayed a crack in his armour. Miss Marple turned to Nash, her eyes bright. "Superintendent, the truth lies in the pattern. Mrs. Symington's death freed Mr. Symington from debt, her inheritance a lifeline. The cyanide, his own, was no coincidence. Agnes, seeing him take it, had to be silenced. The letters, sent over weeks, created a village-wide scandal. Ensuring Mona's murder seemed one tragedy among many. Last night's letter, rushed and crude, shows his panic." She paused, her gaze locking on Richard. "You loved Miss Holland, didn't you? A new life with her required freedom and money." The room stilled, Richard's breath hitching. Jerry, stunned, saw the pieces fall into place. Richard's debts, Mona's wealth, Elsie's quiet allure. Nash, seizing the moment, leaned forward. "Is it true, Symington? Did you kill your wife for her money and Agnes to cover it?" Richard's face crumpled, his hands rising as if to ward off the truth. "No, I couldn't." But his voice broke, and silence damned him. Nash signalled a constable, who stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Richard Symington, you're under arrest for the murders of Mona Symington and Agnes Waddell." The confession, when it came, was halting but complete. In a low voice, Richard admitted the scheme. Mona's inheritance, tied to her family's estate, would clear his debts, but her refusal to lend him funds had strained their marriage. Elsie Holland, kind and attentive, had become a beacon, her affection, real or imagined, promising a new start. The letters, forged in varied hands honed by years of legal work, created a storm of suspicion, deflecting attention from Mona's staged suicide. Agnes, catching him with the cyanide bottle in the study, had sealed her fate. Her murder, planned in haste, used a kitchen knife to avoid suspicion of premeditation. The summer-house meeting, he claimed, was with a creditor, not Elsie, though Nash vowed to verify it. Miss Marple, her knitting folded, spoke softly. "Greed and love, Mr. Symington, are a deadly brew. The letters were your shield, but they betrayed you. Too clever, too many. Agnes's death was your undoing." Richard, head bowed, said nothing, his solicitor's mask shattered. Jerry, watching, felt a mix of triumph and pity. The man who'd unravelled Lymstock had unravelled himself, caught by a spinster's insight and a pilot's persistence. As Richard was led away, Nash clapped Jerry's shoulder. "You did well, Burton. That rumour at the dance, it shook him, just as Miss Marple said." Jerry nodded, his thoughts on Megan. "What about her? She's lost everything." Miss Marple's smile was gentle. "She's young, Mr. Burton, and resilient. Truth, however painful, frees her from fear. Miss Burton will help her mend." Her words, laced with quiet wisdom, eased Jerry's guilt, though he knew Megan's scars would linger. The village, informed by Nash's men, exhaled, its gossip now a murmur of relief. At Little Furze, Joanna embraced Megan, who wept for her father's betrayal, but seemed lighter, as if a weight had lifted. Jerry, standing by the fire, felt Lymstock's fog dissipate, its secrets laid bare. Miss Marple's tapestry, woven from letters and lies, had revealed a killer, and Jerry, with his pilot's eye for patterns, had helped thread the needle. The truth, unveiled at last, was a bitter victory, but a victory nonetheless. Chapter 11. The Aftermath. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Lymstock, casting a tentative glow on a village that seemed to exhale for the first time in weeks. The arrest of Richard Symington, unmasked as the murderer of his wife Mona and their maid Agnes, had rippled through the lanes, loosening the grip of fear that the anonymous letters had tightened. Jerry Burton, standing on the porch of Little Furze, felt the weight of the case lift, though its scars lingered. The truth, dragged into the light by Superintendent Nash's persistence and Miss Jane Marple's piercing insight, had restored a fragile peace, but Lymstock would never be the same. Jerry's own role, spreading the rumour that provoked Richard's desperate forged letter, felt like a distant echo of his pilot days, when spotting a pattern could mean survival. Inside, the drawing room was warm, the scent of toast mingling with the faint crackle of the fire. Joanna, ever the anchor, was coaxing Megan to eat, her voice a blend of firmness and care. The girl, freed from the shadow of her father's crimes, sat with a cup of tea, her dark eyes less haunted than before. Her sketches, once jagged with fear, now showed soft lines, a flower, a bird, as if her hand sought to reclaim something gentle. "You're getting better, Megan," Joanna said, slicing an apple. "We'll go for a walk later, maybe to the river." Megan nodded, a small smile breaking through, and Jerry marvelled at her resilience, a spark that Richard's betrayal hadn't snuffed out. The village, too, was stirring back to life. At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Price served tea with less gossip, her usual relish tempered by the weight of truth. "Mr. Symington, of all people," she said to a customer, her voice low. "Who'd have thought? But it's over now, thank heaven." Her words, overheard as Jerry passed, carried a note of relief, though her eyes still scanned the room. as if old habits of suspicion died hard. The high street, bustling with shoppers, felt lighter, the air no longer thick with whispered accusations. Yet Jerry sensed undercurrents, glances that lingered, voices that dropped when he neared. Lymstock's wounds, like his own from the war, would heal slowly. A letter from Nash, delivered that morning, confirmed Richard's confession. In a cell at Market Basing, he detailed his scheme. Mona's inheritance, a fortune tied to her family's estate, was his lifeline from crushing debts. Her refusal to fund his failing practice had bred resentment, and Elsie Holland's quiet affection, whether real or a fantasy he'd nurtured, offered a vision of escape. The letters, forged with a solicitor's precision, sowed chaos, masking Mona's murder as one of many scandals. Agnes, catching him with the cyanide, had to be silenced, her death a panicked necessity. The cigarette stub in the summer house, Nash noted, traced to a creditor Richard had met to stall, not Elsie, confirming his solitary guilt. "Trials set for next month," Nash wrote. "Thanks to you and Miss Marple, we've got him cold." Detective shared the letter with Joanna, who read it by the fire, her face a mix of triumph and sorrow. "Poor Megan," she said, glancing at the girl, now sketching by the window. "To lose a mother, then a father like this." Jerry nodded, his thoughts on Miss Marple's words. Truth, however painful, frees her from fear. He resolved to visit the spinster, whose unassuming wisdom had unravelled Richard's web. At Miss Barton's cottage, the parlour was a haven of faded lace and ticking clocks, Miss Marple's knitting a cascade of soft wool. She greeted him with a smile, her eyes bright behind spectacles. "Mr. Burton, you look lighter today. The village feels it too, I think." He recounted Nash's letter, watching her reaction. Her needles clicked, a steady rhythm. "A sad case," she said, "but not uncommon. Greed and desperation drive many to ruin, and Mr. Symington's mind was sharp enough to weave a clever trap. Too clever, in the end. The letters were his masterstroke, scattering suspicion like chaff. But evil, Mr. Burton, wears a familiar face. It's the neighbour, the husband, the friend we least suspect." Her voice, gentle yet piercing, sent a shiver through Jerry. He'd seen war's horrors, but this domestic betrayal, cloaked in village charm, was its own kind of darkness. "You saw it from the start," he said, admiration colouring his tone. "The tidy desk, the clean kitchen, details I missed." Miss Marple's smile was modest. "Not missed, Mr. Burton, merely overlooked. You're a man of patterns, like my nephew's boy with his maps. I simply watch people, and people are much the same, in Lymstock or St. Mary Mead. A man like Symington, pressed by debt, in love with a dream, will act predictably if you know the signs." She paused, folding her knitting. "You're rumoured. The dance was the key. It shook him as I knew it would. A cornered man makes mistakes." Jerry leaned forward, curious. "What made you suspect Richard, not Elsie or someone else?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her gaze distant. "The letters, Mr. Burton. Their scope, accusing high and low, from pie to the butcher, required a mind with access and authority, someone who knew Lymstock's pulse. A solicitor, with his files and secrets, fits that mould. Elsie Holland is ambitious, perhaps, but her heart is soft, not cold. And Megan, Her fear was of discovery, not guilt. Richard's debts, his control of the cyanide, his absence at the gay dance, all pointed to him once the fog cleared. Her words, laced with quiet certainty, painted a picture of a village laid bare, its secrets no match for her unassuming gaze. Jerry felt a pang of humility. His pilot's instinct, honed in the skies, had met its match in this spinster's study of human nature. "What now for Lymstock?" he asked. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "It will heal, as villages do. Trust, once broken, mends with time and kindness. Megan will find her way, with Miss Burton's help. And you, Mr. Burton, will find your strength returning in body and spirit." Her faith, simple yet profound, warmed him, and he left with a lighter step, his limp less pronounced. The village, in the days that followed, began to knit itself back together. At the Women's Institute, Miss Barton presided with renewed vigour, her tremulous smile steadier as she planned a summer fair. Mrs. Calthrop, her wiry energy restored, weeded her garden, her laughter ringing across the lane. Even Mr. Pye emerged, from his manor, hosting a tea that drew a cautious crowd. His florid waistcoat gleamed, and his chatter, once querulous, was almost genial. "A dreadful affair," he said to Jerry, pouring sherry. "But we're rid of it, thank heavens. Lymstock's too fine for such nonsense." His relief, shared by the guests, was a balm, though Jerry noted a few guarded glances, as if old suspicions lingered. Dr. Owen Griffith called at Little Furze, his visit a mix of professional duty and neighbourly warmth. Checking Jerry's leg, he apologised for Amy's brashness during the crisis. "She's all heart, but no filter," he said, his tired smile genuine. "She's off to London for a bit. Says Lymstock's too quiet now." His laugh was rueful, and Jerry sensed his relief at the village's calm. Griffith lingered, sharing a brandy, and spoke of Mona's fragility, a trait Richard had exploited. "She deserved better," he said, his voice low. "But at least Megan's free of him." His words, unguarded, underscored the village's shared grief, and its hope for renewal. Megan, under Joanna's care, blossomed in small ways. Her sketches filled a new book, their lines bold and vibrant, and she joined Joanna on walks, her laughter a rare but welcome sound. One afternoon by the river, she confided in Jerry, her voice steady. "I knew father was different after stepmother's letter. He'd lock his study, talk to himself. I was scared to tell anyone." Her eyes, clear now, met his. "You and Miss Marple saved me, Mr. Burton. I'm not afraid any more." Her gratitude, simple and raw, moved him, and said he saw in her the strength Miss Marple had predicted. Nash, stopping by to update Jerry, was optimistic. "Symington's case is airtight," he said, sipping tea in the garden. "The letters, the cyanide, Agnes's knife, all traced to him. The trial will be quick, I reckon. I owe you and Miss Marple. Never thought a village spinster could outsmart a killer." His grin was boyish, but his eyes held respect. Jerry, deflecting praise, asked about Elsie Holland. "She's leaving," Nash said. "Got a job in London, says Lymstock's. Too heavy now, can't blame her." Jerry nodded, wondering if Elsie's departure was escape or ambition. But her role, peripheral at best, no longer mattered. The village's recovery was not without stumbles. At the grocer's, Jerry overheard a spat between two women, one accusing, the other of spreading rumours during the letter crisis. "You called me a liar!" the aggrieved snapped, her basket trembling. The grocer's weary intervention mirrored Lymstock's struggle to move past its fractures, yet signs of healing abounded. Children played in the green, their shouts free of fear. The church bells rang with renewed clarity, and the blue boar's chatter turned to crops and weather, not scandal. Joanna, ever perceptive, sensed Jerry's lingering unrest. "You're brooding again," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "The case is done, Jerry. Let it go." He smiled, but his thoughts strayed to Miss Marple's words. "Evil wears a familiar face." Richard's betrayal, cloaked in respectability, had shaken him, a reminder that danger lurked in the ordinary. "I'm fine, Jo," he said, squeezing her hand. "Just glad it's over." Her nod, knowing but kind, anchored him, and he felt Lymstock's peace seeping into his bones, a balm for his war-worn spirit. A final visit to Miss Marple, the day before her departure, sealed the case's end. Her parlour, aglow with lamplight, was a shrine to quiet wisdom, her knitting folded neatly. "You've done Lymstock a service, Mr. Burton," she said, her voice warm. "A village, like a heart, heals best when truth is its medicine." Jerry, thanking her, admitted his initial scepticism. "I thought you were just a kind old lady," he said, grinning. Her laugh, soft and merry, filled the room. "Many do, Mr. Burton. But kindness sees clearly, and age brings perspective. You, with your pilot's eye, were my equal in this." Her praise, unadorned, humbled him, and he left with a sense of closure, his limp barely noticeable. Lymstock, as Miss Marple had foretold, was mending. Its lanes, once shadowed by fear, glowed with spring's promise, and its people, though scarred, turned to the future. Jerry, watching Megan laugh with Joanna by the river, felt his own wounds easing, the case a bridge from his past to a quieter strength. The letters, the murders, the lies, they were Lymstock's crucible, and in their aftermath the village, like Jerry, found a way to endure. Chapter 12. A quiet departure, the late spring sun bathed Lymstock in a golden haze, softening the edges of its stone walls and thatched roofs as if to soothe the village's lingering wounds. The unmasking of Richard Symington as the murderer, of his wife Mona and their maid Agnes, had lifted a suffocating veil, allowing Lymstock to breathe again. The anonymous letters, those venomous threads that had unravelled the village's trust, were silenced, their author's cunning exposed by Superintendent Nash's diligence, and Miss Jane Marple's unerring insight. Jerry Burton, standing in the Garden of Little Firs, felt the case's resolution like a weight shed, though its echoes stirred memories of his pilot days when clarity came at a cost. His limp, less pronounced now, was a reminder of healing, both physical and otherwise, as Lymstock knit itself back together. Inside, the drawing-room hummed with quiet activity. Joanna, her blonde curls catching the light, was packing a picnic basket, her voice bright as she planned an outing with Megan. The girl, no longer the shadowed figure of weeks past, sat by the window, her sketchbook open to a vibrant drawing of the village green. Her laughter, rare but growing, was a testament to her resilience, nurtured by Joanna's warmth and the truth's bitter freedom. "We'll have lemonade by the river," Joanna declared, tossing an apple to Megan, who caught it with a grin. Jerry, watching, marvelled at their bond, a lifeline for Megan after her father's betrayal. The village, too, was finding its rhythm. The high street buzzed with shoppers, their chatter free of the hissed suspicions that had marked the letter crisis. At the post office, the grocer's boy whistled as he sorted parcels, and the church's bells rang with a clarity that felt like absolution. Yet Jerry sensed fragility beneath the surface. Glances that held a moment too long, voices that faltered when the Symingtons were mentioned. Lymstock's scars, like the shrapnel in his leg, would fade but never vanish, a silent testament to the evil that had worn a neighbour's face. A letter from Nash, delivered that morning, tied the case's final threads. Richard, awaiting trial in market basing, had confessed fully, detailing the forged letter's creation, a solicitor's skill turned to malice, and the cyanide's theft from his study. Mona's inheritance, a fortune he'd coveted, was the motive, sweetened by his delusion of a future with Elsie Holland. Agnes's murder, a desperate act to silence her witness, had been his undoing, provoked by Jerry's rumour at the dance. "The evidence is ironclad," Nash wrote. "He'll hang, likely, but the village is free. My thanks, Burton, and to that remarkable Miss Marple." Jerry, reading by the fire, felt a quiet triumph, tempered by pity for Megan, whose world had crumbled to secure that freedom. Joanna, glancing over his shoulder, sighed. "It's done, Jerry. Megan's smiling again, and Lymstock's waking up. You did that, you and Miss Marple." Her pride, warm and unguarded, stirred him, but he shook his head. Miss Marple saw the truth from the start. Those tidy details, the letter's purpose. I just followed her lead. Joanna's laugh was soft. "Don't sell yourself short. You spotted patterns like in your Spitfire days. You're a team, admit it." Her teasing eased the knot in his chest, and he resolved to bid Miss Marple farewell, her departure set for the afternoon train. The village was alive with small gestures of renewal. At the Blue Boar, Mrs. Price served scones with a smile. Her gossip now of weddings and harvests, not scandal. "It's a new day, Mr. Burton," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We've put that nastiness behind us." Her optimism, though tinged with her old relish, was infectious, and Jerry nodded, noting the fuller tables, the lighter laughter. Even Mr. Pye, once a recluse, was seen strolling the lane, his silk cravat a defiant splash of colour. "Lymstock endures," he declared to a neighbour, his voice carrying to Jerry. "No poison pen can break us." His bravado, once grating, now felt like a village rallying cry. Jerry called on Mrs. Dane Calthrop, seeking her blunt perspective on Lymstock's recovery. Her cottage, a chaos of books and wilted flowers, was a stark contrast to the Symingtons' polished order. She greeted him with a grunt, her wiry frame bent over a typewriter. "You're the hero of the hour, Burton," she said, her eyes sharp. "Caught Symington, saved us all. But don't expect parades. Villages don't work that way." Her laugh was dry, but she poured tea, its strength a match for her candour. "We're healing," she admitted. "The letters cut deep, but folk are talking again, not whispering. Megan's the one to watch. She'll outgrow this, with your sister's help." He asked about Elsie Holland, whose departure Nash had mentioned. Mrs. Calthrop's lips pursed. "Gone to London? Good riddance. Too pretty for her own good, and Richard's fool eyes didn't help. She's no killer, mind, but she stirred the pot, witting or not. Her judgment, harsh but fair, aligned with Miss Marple's view of Elsie as ambitious but not malevolent. Jerry left with a sense of Lymstock's pulse, wounded but beating stronger, its people reclaiming their lives with cautious hope. At Miss Barton's cottage, the parlour was a shrine to faded elegance, its air thick with the scent of lavender and wax. Miss Marple, packing a small case, greeted Jerry with a smile, her white hair neatly pinned, her knitting folded on a chair. "Mr. Burton, how timely," she said, gesturing to a seat. "I was just thinking of Lymstock's resilience, much like yours, I fancy." Her voice, gentle yet probing, drew him in, and he shared Nash's letter, the village's tentative recovery, and Megan's slow blossoming. Her eyes, bright behind spectacles, gleamed with approval. "A village is like a garden," she said, pouring tea. "Weeds may choke it, but care and time bring bloom. You've tended it well." He pressed her on the case, hungry for her final thoughts. "How did you know it was Richard, from those first letters?" Her smile was enigmatic, her fingers tracing the teapot's handle. "I didn't know, Mr. Burton, not at first, but I observed. The letters were too broad, accusing all from butcher to gentry, yet their heart was narrow. Mrs. Symington's death. A man like Richard, pressed by debt, with a solicitor's knack for detail, could craft such a web. His study, the cyanide, Mona's tidy desk, these were signposts. And Agnes's death, so swift after her sighting, screamed of a man protecting his secret. Her voice, soft as her shawl, carried a steel that humbled Jerry. "You saw what? I couldn't," he admitted, leaning forward. "I thought it was spite, not strategy." Miss Marple's laugh was a delicate chime. "You saw plenty, Mr. Burton. Your rumour at the dance was a masterstroke. It shook him, as I knew it would. You're a man of action, like my nephew's friend in the Navy. I merely notice things. People are much the same, you know, in Lymstock, or my St. Mary Mead. A man driven by greed, dreaming of love, will weave a noose for himself if you watch long enough." Her humility, paired with her razor-sharp mind, left Jerry in awe, his pilot's pride tempered by her quiet genius. He asked about Megan, whose fear had been a key to the case. Miss Marple's gaze softened. A wounded soul, but strong. Her silence was loyalty, not guilt, and your sister's kindness is her bridge to healing. She'll carry scars, but scars are proof of survival. Keep her close, Mr. Burton. She trusts you. Her words, warm with faith, eased Jerry's lingering guilt over Megan's ordeal. He shared Joanna's role, her fierce protection of the girl, and Miss Marple nodded. Miss Burton is a rare spirit, light but not shallow. Lymstock is lucky to have you both. The conversation turned to the village's future. Lymstock will mend, Miss Marple said, folding a scarf into her case. Trust, once shattered, rebuilds slowly, but it rebuilds. The letters exposed weaknesses, petty grudges, hidden envies, but also strengths. Mrs. Calthrop's courage, Miss Barton's grace, even Mr. Pye's stubborn pride. They'll carry this place forward. Her optimism, grounded in her study of human nature, was a balm, and Jerry felt his own hope stir, an echo of the resilience he'd found after his crash. As the hour of her departure neared, Jerry walked with her to the station, the village unfolding around them. Children played in the green, their shouts free of the fear that had clung to Lymstock's air. A woman swept her doorstep nodding, to Jerry with a shy smile, and the church's weather vane gleamed under the sun. Miss Marple, her step brisk despite her age, carried her umbrella like a sceptre, her presence a quiet force. "You've grown fond of Lymstock," she observed, glancing at him. "It suits you, Mr. Burton, this quiet life with its hidden depths." He laughed, surprised by her insight. "I came for rest, not a murder case. But you're right, it's got under my skin. Joanna's talking of staying longer, and I'm not arguing." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A village has a way of claiming you. You've given it truth, and it's given you purpose. That's a fair trade." Her words, simple yet profound, settled in him, a counterpoint to the restlessness of his war years. Lymstock, with its flaws and fortitude, had become a home, its peace a mirror to his own. At the station, the platform was near empty. The train's distant whistle, a soft promise. Joanna and Megan joined them, the girl clutching a small bouquet of daisies for Miss Marple. "For you," Megan said, her voice steady, her eyes clear. "Thank you for everything." Miss Marple's smile was radiant, her hand gentle on Megan's cheek. "My dear, you're very welcome. Keep drawing and keep brave." Megan nodded, stepping back to Joanna, who hugged her fiercely. Jerry, watching, felt a lump in his throat, the girl's courage a testament to Miss Marple's faith. The train pulled in, its steam curling into the sky. Miss Marple, case in hand, turned to Jerry, her expression merry yet piercing. "You underestimated me, didn't you?" she said, her voice teasing. "Never mind, it's a common mistake. But never underestimate an old lady with a knitting needle, Mr. Burton. We see more than you think." Her laugh, bright and infectious, drew his own, and he shook her hand, its strength surprising. "I'll never make that mistake again," he said, grinning. "Safe travels, Miss Marple. And thank you for Lymstock and for me." She boarded with a wave, her figure small but indomitable in the carriage window. As the train chugged away, Jerry, Joanna and Megan stood together, their hands raised in farewell. The village stretched behind them, its rooftops aglow, its heart beating anew. Jerry felt the case's end like a chapter closed, its lessons, trust, truth, resilience, etched in him. Lymstock, scarred but standing, was his crucible, and Miss Marple, with her needles and her wisdom, its unlikely alchemist. As the train vanished, he turned to Joanna and Megan, their faces bright with hope, and knew the quiet departure marked not an end, but a beginning.